The three poisons are also regarded as the three fires. Why? Once they cause bad karmic effects, it will be as if suffering is burning our body and mind like fire. It is like a burning house. And if we were to live inside a burning house, then there will only be pain and suffering. And that's exactly what the three poisons do to us, as our mind and thoughts are filled with the three poisons. And they will start to burn like fire and cause suffering in us. And as we've said that the three poisons consist of greed, anger, and ignorance. And let's break them down into three separate parts and look at them in detail. We'll start with greed. Greed is a result of our attachment and clingings to matters in this world. This could be things such as money or fame as well as lust. But for someone with the mind of wisdom will realize that whatever these are the human beings clinging onto, they are merely like poisonous snakes that will only cause trouble for us. One day, Buddha and his disciple walked past a field, and they saw a piece of gold sitting amongst a bush. Therefore, the Buddha pointed at the gold and said to his disciple, "Look, there is a poisonous snake." And then the disciple replied, "Yes, indeed, it is a poisonous snake." Then the two of them kept walking. A nearby farmer overheard this conversation and was curious about what they were talking about. Therefore, he walked over and discovered a piece of gold lying amongst the bush. Therefore, he said, "How can this be a poisonous snake? It's a piece of gold." Upon seeing that piece of gold, the farmer became greedy and took the piece of gold for himself. But back in that period, only kings were allowed to have gold. Therefore, the fact that this farmer had a piece of gold with him was quickly found out by the king himself. Therefore, the king sent for people to arrest this farmer, and the farmer was locked up in jail. And it was not until then did the farmer realize why the Buddha regarded the piece of gold as a poisonous snake. Is the gold itself really a poisonous snake? No. It's actually our greed and attachment that causes us suffering. And next, let's look at anger. Anger arises as a result of things not turning out according to our likings. Sometimes we get angry. When we get angry, we could turn friends into enemies. We could turn lovers into strangers. And even a sentence that is not pleasing to the heart can cause a fight. But in Buddhism, it tells us that anger is like a fire that burns out all of our merits. And the Chinese term for that would be 火烧功德林, which literally means that the flame of anger will burn off the forest of merit and virtue. In other words, it's the merit that we have accumulated by doing good deeds that could become lost all of a sudden just because we get angry. So for example, you go to a Buddhist temple to help out. Your intentions were good. Your purposes were good. You were only there to serve and to help people. But suddenly someone comes around and tells you, "Hey, you shouldn't be sitting there. You shouldn't be sitting on that chair." And then you suddenly get very, very angry. And you said to yourself, "What's wrong with sitting in this chair? This is such a stupid place. I'm not going to come anymore." And just because of that angry thought, you have severed your chances to come to a Buddhist temple and to develop good connections with people. And no matter how many good things you have done before that, they would have all become nothing. Therefore, we need to be very careful with our anger. And the third of the three poisons is ignorance. Ignorance is a result of not understanding the law of causes and conditions. Once a rich man saw his friend's new house, which was a 3-storied house, and became very envious. Therefore, he went home and told his workers to also build a 3-storied house for him. But as the engineers started to dig into the ground to set up a foundation, the rich man became angry and impatient, and he said, "Why are you digging into the ground when I wanted you to build a 3-story house? Are you trying to rip me off?" But the engineer replied, "In order for us to build a 3-storied house, we need to first set up a strong foundation." But the rich man became even more angry. He said, "I asked for a 3-storied house. I do not want a firm foundation, so just build me the 3rd story of the house." The engineer could not fight back, but did as he was told. But of course, this, what we call the 3-story house, quickly collapsed because it did not have the support of a firm foundation or the 1st or 2nd stories. So from this story, it tells us about the ignorance that the wealthy man possessed. What he only wanted was the result, but he had neglected the conditions necessary for him to achieve that result. And there's another story which you can share with you. Once there was a farmer who got very hungry and ate 7 pancakes. And when he was through with the first 6.5 pancakes, he suddenly felt very satisfied. But he stopped for a little while and said to himself, "I'm satiated with this half a pancake. All the 6 I've eaten before are simply a waste of food. If I had known that I could satisfy myself with this half a pancake, I would have eaten it first." But how can you eat the last piece of pancake to be full without eating the first 6? So once again, this is an ignorance of causes and conditions. The man did not realize that it was the accumulation of the first 6 pancakes that allowed him to feel full upon eating the final half piece of pancake. Therefore, this is something which we need to be very careful with, to be very clear with the law of cause and effect as well as causes and conditions, in order not to fall into the ignorant paths, or not to become ignorant in seeing how the things really are. And now, how do we cure the 3 poisons? The Buddhist sutras have provided with solutions, telling us that generosity helps relieve us from greed. Patience under insult helps us deal with anger, while wisdom helps cure the illness of ignorance. In general, we can regard the 3 poisons as a kind of desire or craving. And it is this craving for pleasure through sensual touch, craving for existence and being, as well as craving for non-existence, and even for annihilation that has caused our rebirth in the cycle of birth and death. Because of this craving, the false idea of the self arises out of ignorance. And then this idea then leads to suffering, because we're constantly striving to satisfy the cravings of a self, which in reality is empty in nature. And all of this will cause us suffering. And now let us look at the 3rd noble truth. After discovering that there is suffering in life, and helping us realizing what actually causes these sufferings, then let's look at the possibility of an end to this suffering, and to see what it is like when this suffering becomes ended. Another word for the cessation of suffering is regarded as the word nirvana in Buddhism. And it is like a finger that points to the moon. So the 3rd noble truth is a finger that points to nirvana. And now we have to realize that the 3rd noble truth itself is not nirvana, but it actually does tell us something about nirvana. And in Buddhism, it teaches us that in order to reinstate our Buddha nature, we need to get rid of the 3 poisons. So once again, there is suffering because we have desires. Therefore, once the desires cease to exist, suffering will also cease. In other words, cessation of desires equals cessation of suffering. But of course, this does not mean that you should stop wanting your family or any money. Rather, it's about pulling yourself out of the abyss of desires and cease thinking about the things that you want. In other words, instead of wanting things for your own benefit, perhaps it's time that you start looking at what you can offer to the world. And this world will be a world of freedom and content. Okay, so we've talked about how cessation of suffering is also regarded as nirvana. What exactly is this state of nirvana? Basically, it is a state that cannot be described by language. But if we were to try, we could say that it is a state beyond greed, anger, ignorance, and suffering. It is a state beyond all duality and distinctions between right and wrong, self and other, good and bad, and life and death. In other words, the state of nirvana allows us to see things as they really are without illusion or ignorance. Now, in our attempt to describe nirvana with language, we can only best say that nirvana means the following. First of all, it is the extinction of craving. It is the absence of desire. It actually means blowing out. And it could also mean extinction. And it can also mean absolute truth. Now, what is absolute truth? It's the fact that there is nothing absolute in the world, that everything is relative, conditioned and impermanent, and that there is no unchanging, everlasting, absolute substance like self or soul within or without. Okay, let's try to understand nirvana once again through the 10 metaphors of nirvana which have been provided by the sutra, where it tells us that, first of all, nirvana is like a lotus flower. For a lotus flower grows in mud, but it cannot produce a flower if it is taken from the mud in which it grows. Similarly, nirvana is in everything that is, and it cannot be understood without this. Secondly, nirvana is like water. Just like water can clean away dirt, nirvana can also clear away all suffering. Just as water can extinguish the heat of a fire, so nirvana can extinguish the heat of our defiled passions. Just as water can slake the most terrible thirst, so nirvana can relieve even the worst suffering. Thirdly, nirvana is like an antidote for all 4 poisons. The poisons of delusion are many, but nirvana can cure any ailment they can cause. And fourthly, nirvana is like a great sea. A truly great sea sees no shores anywhere. It is limitless and without preference. And it can perceive and receive anything that flows into it with perfect imperturbability. Nirvana is just like this. Fifthly, nirvana is like food. Good food can sustain us and satisfy our hunger. Similarly, nirvana can satisfy all of our desires and answer all of our questions.